Good morning, everyone. It's just past 9:30 Eastern. Welcome to the second day of the SAM 2021 International Business Conference, which is our 76th annual conference being held virtually for the second time. We have a great plenary session, but before that, I want to just quickly mention that there are people who will be logging on to this meeting, both from the Zoom as well as through WOVA, which is our conference management system. And we will have this session recorded and available on the website through the rest of the conference and even beyond for some time for everyone to revisit this and have chats around it, ask questions. There are some polls that have been set up. So there will be online engagement and interaction through WOVA platform, not only during this session, but also after this session. For any questions on this session, if you're attending and if you have a question, you can type the question in the chat box, or you can, at the end of the presentation, choose to ask the question by either putting your hand up or sending a chat saying that you would like to ask a question. So we would encourage interactions. With that, it is absolutely my honor and delight to introduce today's plenary speaker, Dr. Jaime Taylor. Dr. Taylor is the Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Marshall University. Let me talk first a little bit about his background as a leader, as an administrator, and as an academic, and then I'll talk a little bit about my personal experiences of having worked with Dr. Taylor. Dr. Jaime Taylor joined the Department of Physics at Austin Peay State University in Tennessee in 1995 after obtaining his Ph.D. from the University of Tennessee Space Institute. Dr. Taylor served as department chair from 2000 to 2008, and then as Dean of the College of Science and Mathematics at Austin Peay State from 2008 to 2013, and again from 2015 to 2018. He has also served as the interim Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Austin Peay State from 2013 to 2015. In his role at Austin Peay, Dr. Taylor increased freshman enrollment by 26.3%, increased the fall-to-fall retention of freshmen from 65.9% to 71.8%, and increased the fall-to-fall retention of Black students from 63.3% to 72.5% while serving as interim provost. Dr. Taylor was a NASA faculty fellow in 1996, 1997, 2001, and 2002. So as you can see, Dr. Taylor has served in progressively senior and more responsible administrative roles throughout his career at Austin Peay, serving for a long period of time, of course, as a very significant faculty member, but also after that as a department chair, as a dean, and then as provost. Currently, Dr. Taylor serves as the Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Marshall University, where I work as well as the Dean of the Lewis College of Business. Dr. Taylor came in here and is finishing his 3 years at Marshall. And in this period of time at Marshall, he has been able to achieve significant results in student success. Dr. Taylor gains his greatest satisfaction from helping people to not only just achieve their dreams, but encouraging them to have big dreams to achieve. And I do want to mention that in my interactions with Dr. Taylor and with all the deans having interacted as well as the faculty, what we have seen is a leader who is inspiring, who is collaborative, who is visionary, who is engaging, and who is entrepreneurial. Dr. Taylor has truly changed the culture, the academic culture at Marshall, and has really inspired everyone to succeed. And amongst many things that have been accomplished during this time is the Carnegie Research University designation of Marshall during this period of time, about $50 million annual research budgets that the university has, as well as tremendous improvements in student success, student retention, student enrollment, and a variety of fundraising initiatives pertaining to academic initiatives. So Dr. Taylor is somebody who has not only worked in a variety of different administrative and academic roles across different states, but has also touched all our stakeholders in a transformative manner. It is an absolute delight to have him with us today at SAM. And with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jaime Taylor, Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Marshall University.
Thank you so much, Dean Mukherjee. Just want to say most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here today is obviously a team effort, and Dean Mukherjee is a huge part of that. Really, he set the example that other deans and other faculty and individuals on campus follow. And not only has he done a great deal for Marshall University, but he's having a huge impact across the entire state of West Virginia with economic development, entrepreneurship, and basically trying to move the state forward. I'll just kind of say it, he's essentially a rock star in West Virginia. So thank you very much for inviting me, Dean Mukherjee. I want to take a moment, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and start with the presentation. And so I want to start by thanking the Society of Advancement of Management for inviting me here today. This is a huge honor for me to give a presentation here. And my goal today is going to be first to just kind of give a conceptual framework for student success. And then after that, try to drill down within that framework to talk about some of the things that I've done in terms of implementing things, but things that, where we've had success, and maybe give all of you ideas that you can implement within your college or at your university. There's no basically magic formula for student success. This basically, as you'll see as we go along, it's all about helping students one by one. All right, and then this, give me 1 second here. What I want to do today is talk, or the outline. I'm going to first focus on why student success is important. And it's becoming more important essentially every year. Then I'm going to talk about something that got me started into student success, and that's mathematical pathways. And then probably the two critical components of student success, and that's first-time, full-time freshman retention and 6-year graduation rates. So I'm going to start with why student success. Why is it important? And what I'll do is I'll be talking about the Tennessee funding formula a little bit, and then also just the ethics behind why we should help students. So what really got me started in student success is in the state of Tennessee around 2008, the state of Tennessee adopted an outcomes-based funding formula. It was the first state to adopt this at a large level. 90% of the funding comes from what you're looking at right now, and the other 10% comes from other types of performance funding. So 90% of our funding comes from either progressing students through the curriculum or making sure students graduate. And let me kind of talk about some of these items here. And if you'll notice, this is it. This is the entire funding formula before you for the state of Tennessee for all the four-year universities. And if you'll notice, the one that's in white is the only one that is not focused on student success or helping students graduate. And so the first three are pretty obvious. When a student accumulates 24 hours, that's a benchmark and they get counted. When they accumulate 48 hours, they get counted, or when they accumulate 72 hours. However, once they graduate with either a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree, this is when there's a big mark in it and counts for a tremendous amount of the funding. At the university I was at in Tennessee, for every student that graduated, you get $6,000 in the funding formula. And so that was a pretty big benchmark. The same thing for achieving a master's or a doctoral. Now, the last two items, degrees per 100 FTE and 6-year graduation rate. 6-year graduation rate is pretty obvious. How many students, what's the percentage of the student cohort that comes in? So 6 years prior, you have a freshman cohort. How many of those graduate in 6 years? So that percentage plays a big role in the funding formula. The one that's a little more complicated to explain is the degrees per 100 FTE. What this is you're trying to generate degrees while not having a lot of students on campus. What this one measures is how long a student or how many hours a student takes on your campus. And so what the state of Tennessee was trying to do is try to get students to graduate at 120 hours and not take extra hours. And so there was a lot of effort in trying to efficiently get students out in terms of graduation. Now, one thing that happened with this funding formula that I would want to point out, which was huge, was before this funding formula, there was a culture at the institution I was at where people essentially took pride in failing students. Faculty would talk to each other and say, I have a low rate of individuals getting out of my class because I'm a very hard instructor and I push students really hard, and that way lots of them fail. The culture then shifted to helping students. Now, one of the things that came up immediately or early on was with the funding formula, there was a statewide concern from faculty that this would cause grade inflation, or there'd be pressure put on faculty to help or basically lower their standards so they could graduate. Let me just say right now that absolutely did not happen. What happened was there were other structures put in place to help students. And after a 12-year period, this has essentially been something that everybody's been incredibly positive in that state. These are the results. And I wanted to point these out because there's some important things to point out here. One, the one that's in red was the institution I was at. We were the smallest of all the four-year schools in the state of Tennessee. We basically had no political clout in the state. And so prior to the funding formula, basically each institution would lobby for additional funding. With the funding formula, what happened was the formula dictated how much funding you received. That institution went from $25 million a year to $47.5 million a year in just a 8-year period. And so that would have never happened without the funding formula. The other thing that was very interesting to point out is that the four-year institutions as a whole were able to increase the funding to higher education. Before, they were fighting each other for funding for higher ed. The funding formula caused everybody to basically team up together and become a lobbying force, not just lobby for their own institution, but to lobby for increased funding to higher ed in general and to fund the funding formula. So as I move forward, let me mention a couple of things of why I think just in general, student success is important. One is just from an ethical standpoint, that's what we're here in higher ed to do. We're not here to flunk them out. We want to help them get through school. Now, obviously, we don't want to lower our standards or expectations. And what I would say is our institution was doing this back in Tennessee, we actually increased our standards and expectations. At the same time, we were progressing more students through it. And so students will move forward and they're happy to achieve those expectations. And what we found is I'll talk about shortly, there's a lot more to student success than academics. There's other things that keep students from graduating or getting through. The other item is, and this is one of the things that Tennessee was pushing this for, is helping students succeed and increasing the number of college graduates helps the state's economy and the U.S. economy. In Tennessee, it helped. There was a radical shift in philosophy at the state legislature that they recognize how important it is to get college graduates and how the state of Tennessee needed more for growth, that they're now funding out-of-state students in the funding formula. And I think that, as far as I can tell, it might be the only state in the nation that's actually providing funding for those students that come in from out of state. So pretty radical shift there where they're saying, look, if a student comes in, we want them in our state, we're going to help fund them to get them through college, because the idea is they'll stay within that state once they graduate. All right, mathematical pathways is essentially where I essentially got started. I was the dean of the College of Science and Mathematics. And so when I started there, I looked at our math program and found that less than 20% of students that came in with a math efficiency actually made it through their first college credit bearing math course. So if a student came in, and back then we had developmental study courses, and if they had to develop and start in developmental study, only 20% of those students made it through that one math course. So right there, you're down to 20, if they can't get through the math course, they're not going to graduate. And so we put a lot of effort into thinking about what can we do to help them through that that math course. So as a background, traditionally at that time, students were all taking college algebra. That was the gateway course, as the math core. One of the things we did is we changed that. What we did is we said, okay, instead of having my college algebra, and is college algebra really a good preparation for most of the disciplines they were going into? And so we took a deliberate look at what mathematics a student would need within their discipline. And what we came up with was there in the middle, down at the bottom, was the social and health sciences. Most of those students were end up taking statistics when they got in their program. And so our attitude was, why shouldn't we have them take statistics as their core math course? In the humanities and arts, most of those individuals just really needed to have a better understanding of quantitative reasoning. And so we developed a special math course just for those students in the humanities and arts. In engineering and the hard sciences, college algebra was just a beginning course. It definitely wasn't the ending course. And what we wanted to do is create a longer pathway to make sure those students knew that not only do they need to get through college algebra, but they had to get through pre-calculus and calculus. And so these are the pathways that we focused on in getting students into the right course. Again, prior to this, all of them were going through working their way through a college algebra course. The other big component was the co-requisite model. And to be honest with you, this is just as important as the math pathway. So students were working their way to try to get through that first college algebra course, but some of them had to start in either an intermediate algebra course or a beginning algebra course. And real quickly, let's just talk about the math of that. Let's say they had to get through an intermediate algebra course, and we were able to increase the success rate to 70%. Well, then they had to shift over and take the algebra course, and let's say we increased the success rate of that to 70%. Well, the problem is you have a pathway there where you have the first class and the second class, only 50% of the students would make it through both courses. And so just having that pathway creates a barrier for those students getting through. So what we did is we created what we called a co-requisite model and immediately put students in those college credit-bearing courses. And so if they were in statistics, were going to be a business student, they'd immediately take that statistics course, but we would have a co-requisite course that they would be in to help support them to get them through that statistics course. We did the same thing with the quantitative course and, of course, the algebra course. Now, before I go to the next slide, let me just say quickly that with these two things in combination, at the school I was at, prior to doing anything, the success rate of a student with a math deficiency was 15%. So, I said it was less than 20% earlier. That's in general, but at our institution, it was 15%. So 15% of those students that came in with the math deficiency made it through one math course. We were able to increase that to 65%. So that's not just a small incremental increase. This is a pretty radical change in how those students were progressing through their math course. So going from 15% to 65%. And as you can imagine, this got a lot of national attention. What we did next was, because at the state in Tennessee, this garnered so much attention, the state of Tennessee wanted to apply this method to every school within the system. What we did is at the Tennessee Board of Regents, so all the community colleges fell under the Board of Regents, we implemented this on a very large scale. So we didn't just say, oh, we're going to start at one community college or another community college. What we did was we took all 13 community colleges and implemented it across the entire state. As you can imagine, this was a pretty dramatic effort. Even just collecting data was a dramatic effort because we got all the schools into the same data system so we could gather data on a large scale. Within 1 year, we pulled this model off across the entire state. What you're looking at right now is over 20,000 students participated in this model. And so about probably 30 to 40% did the old model where they did not have the co-requisite. And then we had the entire new model across the whole state. And you can see the radical changes. Even for students that were very low on the ACT score, there's still a pretty large fraction of them that were able to get through the course with this co-requisite model. I guess the most important thing is you can see there, if they were doing the old prerequisite or developmental studies model, where they had to take prerequisite courses, those percentages were incredibly low. And so I know a lot of people, this seems counterintuitive because they're like, oh, well, the best thing to do is keep putting them through a lot of classes and keep educating them and they'll finally get it. Well, as I always tell people in math and the sciences, data doesn't, these things don't lie. This is the reality. You can come up with all the conceptual arguments you want why it shouldn't work or why something else would work. But this was done with over 20,000 students, and the co-requisite model was far superior than doing the prerequisite model. And so once this data got out, almost just about every other state is now adopting this model. So it was really kind of exciting taking it from one institution to becoming the national model. I know Georgia's now doing it, the state of West Virginia is doing it, and many other states have adopted this model. Yeah, if you want to learn more about it, if you've heard of Complete College America, this is one of the things that they call their game changers, and they encourage every institution to implement. What I would say here, since all of you are in the colleges of business, I would encourage you to work, if it's not already been done, to have statistics as that core requisite for your area. That way, when they then get into your statistics course, they've actually had some statistics and you can do more advanced applications as opposed to having to teach the elementary stats. All right, next I want to talk about fall to fall, first time, full-time freshman retention. This is basically just how many students come in as a freshman and how many of them are still there when you get to your sophomore year. And it turns out that this is where we lose most of our students. Where I was at in Tennessee, we only had, when I became interim provost there, only 65% of the freshmen that started made it to their sophomore year. So 35% dropped out of the institution. We put all these efforts into recruiting students, and then we lose 35% of them in the first year. So this is something that I put a lot of effort into working on and trying to increase that percentage. I was only interim provost for essentially 2 years. And let me just say what, this was a kind of almost a hands-off effort. The president that was there at the time and I, at the very beginning of the year, just had several conversations across campus. And we asked everybody to identify students or help a student and said, look, if everybody could just help one student, it would have an incredible impact on moving things forward. And as we found out that year, it wasn't academically what was always holding students back. It was a lot of times it was financial issues, emotional issues, maybe a death in the family, something's going on at home, lots of things that were happening. If people could find out what those issues were and get those individuals help, those are the things that caused them to drop out of school. We were able to increase the number of students that came in, going from fall to their sophomore year, from almost 66% to almost 73%. Almost 77% increase. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that at exactly the same time we did this, where all we did was just ask people to help and try to create a campus culture where everybody was helping students, and again, increased it by 7%. Middle Tennessee State University hired 50 advisors. Pretty major project. They invested $3 million in student success. And through that investment, they were able to increase their student success by 2%. And so we basically didn't have any investment at that point. It was more of a culture shift. And so I just want to emphasize there how important having the right culture on your campus is. Now, I'm not going to say, the reality is having those advisors is also critical. But if you don't have the culture is much more important than anything in terms of helping. The other thing I want to point out is if you can create a culture where people get involved, some ideas will come up that you never thought about. It turned out that our African American Culture Center, based on my having these conversations with them, developed a mentorship program, and they were able to increase the fall-to-fall retention of Black students by almost 10%. This is a pretty radical increase. And I didn't even know that they did this. They didn't come to me and say, hey, we're going to do this big project. We need any funding. They just went off and did it. Once I saw the numbers, I went back and tried to figure out how they were able to, what happened. And it turned out, that's when I found out about this mentorship program. More importantly, what I want to say at this point, and this is important for colleges of business, there's so many things that you can do within the College of Business to try to help get those students engaged as early as possible within your college. And that's the key to student success with freshmen. These students come in, they don't know anybody, they're scared a lot of times, they're new to the university, they don't have friends. If you can find structures to get them engaged with the institution, then you're going to find out what issues they have, and you can help. It's usually some kind of crisis that comes up that keeps them from progressing to their sophomore year. So let's now, again, these were pretty just creating the campus culture. When I came to Marshall, my goal was then to basically say, can we do this in a much more structured way? So here's what the goal was. Trying to create some structures to help improve student success. And with those structures, two things. One, identify students at risk as early as possible. Two, basically create support systems to help students once we understand what kind of risks they have. When I say identifying risk, there's two things. Again, identifying sooner, but also the type of risk. Some things are typically just academic. They have low ACT score, or their GPA in high school is low. We know that they're academically might be challenged. What can we help do them, help them to get them through academically? And that's the standard thing that most people are aware of. However, there's lots of other types of risks that come up. And I'll talk about those in a moment. One obvious one is finances. Are they okay financially? Do they have the money to get through? Because if they're mentally focused in on their finances, they're not going to focus in on their academics. At Marshall University, we have a psychology professor with a background in statistics who has now developed a predictive analytics model to predict not just whether a student, what issues they might have academically, but other issues. And I'm going to go through this here in just a minute because it's pretty incredible what she's been able to do. And one of the things that, since we're talking with the College of Business, probably be talking to her about is how she might be able to market this model nationally in terms of doing an entrepreneurship type thing. So what she does is first we input lots of information. We input the high school GPA, we input ACT score, SAT score, and then she has a very detailed questionnaire with lots of different levels of ways of answering this questionnaire. Because she's both a psychologist and a statistician, my background is I'm a mathematician and a physicist, and so I'm very aware of how to build predictive analytics models. But a lot of times I don't understand, as you would say, the guts of that model and what's happening in there. Or do I have the right inputs and the outputs in that model? With this particular questionnaire, she's created some very good inputs into the model. And what she can do now is she can look at a student and say, okay, what is it we need to do to help this student get through their college career? Some of the things we've identified is which students might need a authority figure. And when we say authority figure, we mean a faculty member specifically. And I'll talk about, and actually it's going to be very specific about what that faculty member needs to do to help that student. Second, we can identify students that need help with critical thinking or study skills. We also have a method of identifying the students that need, at the moment I'll call it a willingness to change. Is that student self-aware? When they come up with issues or they hit a roadblock, can they take a step back and say, I hit this roadblock, here's why I hit the roadblock, and here's what I need to do to overcome that roadblock. And the other thing we do is we have peer mentors in addition to authority figures. So incredible predictive analytics model. This is what we do right at the very beginning. And let me say, this is a lot different than what we've, I'll tell you what, let me move on for just a moment. with that, let me say that predictive analytics model, in the past, when we tried to identify students early, most of you have probably heard of early alert systems. Well, I always say an early alert system is way too late. Before the early alert system, we would wait until a student failed a course and we say, oh my, they failed a couple courses, we need to get them help. Well, it's way too late at that point, because once they fail a course, the odds of them being successful are minimal. On the other hand, early alert systems were supposed to help tell when the student did poorly on their first exam. That's still pretty good. It's better than waiting until they finish the course. But if they've already failed an exam, again, they're already behind. What these predictive analytics models do is allow you to, before the student ever starts the semester, do some analytics on them and predict what that student needs before the semester starts, so you can get them the help they need prior to the beginning of the semester. And this is the type of thing that can dramatically improve student success. Let me now talk about some of the structures we put in place at Marshall University. And this is so far beyond what I saw happening in the state of Tennessee. And I'll say that, as Dean Mukherjee said earlier, this is a very much a campus-wide effort, putting these things in place, because you don't make this type of progress if it's only one or two people doing it. Definitely a campus-wide effort. So first of all, and a very critical one, is having an outstanding advising system. We have a very strong advising group at Marshall University. They work with the students way ahead of time. Based on the predictive analytics model, they make sure they're in the proper courses. They talk to the students, and if there's other issues, they help address those issues, as I've talked about, like financial, and if they can identify stuff that's happening on the front end, they go ahead and address those. So it's very important to have a very strong advising structure. And I won't go into too much of it, but there's been lots of work done on advising and how that needs to be a campus-wide approach, not just a college-by-college approach. And basically getting those advisors talking to each other, because a lot of times if you're looking at fall-to-fall retention for the entire campus, students tend to fall through the cracks. They're not quite attached to a college. They're in between colleges, or they're switching from one college to the other. And it's tracking those students that aren't sure where they're supposed to be that's absolutely critical. The other thing we put in place just this past year was a program we call Friend at Marshall. So every student that comes into Marshall has a peer mentor. This peer mentor is typically a senior student, and it would be nice to be able to do better than this, but we have one peer mentor per 100 students. A lot of students that peer mentor is managing, but it's in a minute you'll see the success we've had with that. What that peer mentor does is they essentially communicate with all 100 students once every week. They send out emails, they send out text messages, they ask how the students are doing. And we've identified a lot, especially during COVID, this has been huge, because we found out that many students weren't getting out of their dorm, they were homesick, they felt isolated, and we were able to identify those students very rapidly and find ways to help get them out and get them in contact with other people, and just provide some emotional support to those students very early on. The third item, we haven't implemented this one yet. We're implementing this one in the upcoming year. We have a first year seminar in critical thinking. What we've discovered is that some students, this isn't very important to them, again, with the predictive analytic model. And so we're going to put those students in our standard courses where we can really focus in on the critical thinking, but knowing that they're going to be able to go through that. We're then going to set up 6 small, more personalized first year seminar courses in critical thinking. And the students that struggle with critical thinking are going to be in those courses. And what we're wanting to do is basically help develop that one-on-one relationship with the faculty member, so the faculty member can help them identify where they're struggling with critical thinking, and help them develop the skills that they're going to need to be a successful college student. The EDGE program has been around at Marshall for a little while. And what this does is it provides students with a faculty mentor to help them through. This was a somewhat unique program. When you look at students, you have the ones that are very high achieving, and they really, don't need much help at all. And then you have the students that are very much at risk. And we always have special programs for those students that are very much at risk to help them get through. It was that middle group of students that kind of got lost. And a lot of times their success, their fall-to-fall retention was lower than the students that came in at risk. And so what we wanted to do is get those students help navigating the Marshall campus. And so again, the predictive analytics model helps identify those students that are going to need that help. We then get them with a faculty mentor. That faculty mentor is typically not in their discipline. It might even be a faculty mentor that's outside of their college. And this is a very interesting idea, because what this faculty mentor is there to do is not help them academically. It's to help them think about the university and help them navigate the university system and help get them to get to the help that they need. Let's say registering for courses, or if they need help within, academically, helping help that student understand how they should approach the faculty member for assistance. And if they're not getting assistance, how to get it from some other source. Again, very interesting idea. The last one I found pretty interesting was because what we do, and this was again because we have a psychologist that's our statistician that developed the model. She is able to ask the appropriate questions to find out which students were not needed help understanding or developing the skills necessary to change. What are those metacognitive thinking abilities? Can a student take a step back and say, I'm struggling in this course. Why am I struggling in this course? What is it that I need to change so that I can become a better student? And so basically what she has is this very large psychology introductory psychology course that she teaches herself. It's about 120 students, but she has ways of working with each student, works around individually to help get them to become more self-aware. And we've been collecting data on this to see what those students, the success rate they had prior to this and what their success rate is now. So again, what I've covered is one, identifying those through a predictive analytics model prior to the semester starting. And then we get them match them up with the appropriate help. And as you can see, this is a very structured approach to getting them with that right type of help. So what are the results of this? This last year, during COVID, during a year in which students, particularly freshmen, felt very isolated, it was a very unusual experience for them. We were able to go, particularly in that spring semester, we were able to increase our fall-to-fall retention by 5%. And I was, as you can imagine, I was just hoping to maintain our retention rates, but we dramatically improved it. And what I would also say is we improved our retention rates at every level, not just freshmen. The freshman was the biggest one at 5%, but the sophomores to juniors, juniors to seniors, and so forth, all those retention rates increased by anywhere from 2 to 3%. So what I want to point out is these type of methods help. In starting back all the way from my time in Tennessee to here, you got to first create the culture where people want to do this. Fortunately, when I came to Marshall University, that culture had already existed. And of course, Marshall had already had 72.8 is a pretty solid fall-to-fall retention for the type of students that come to Marshall. A lot of Appalachian students, they're struggling. They're not the type that typically do well because they're first-time full-time or they're first-generation college students. So Marshall was already doing a really good job. With this highly structured approach, we took what was good to making it absolutely exceptional. Now we're on par with some of the tier 1 institutions and the success rates that they have. I now want to talk about 6-year graduation rates. And this was, I'll have to say, something that was pretty exciting to me. One day I was talking, and a lot of these ideas come up just through discussions. It was February of 2019, and we were having some discussions. I'm like, is there anything we could do to increase our 6-year graduation rate? Because typically you realize that these students had come in 2013. And so basically it seems like we're already done. Whatever the 6-year graduation rate, it's going to be what it is. And we started thinking, is there something we could do to get that over 50%? Well, what we did was we came up with this idea of looking at the students that were in that freshman cohort from 2013, identifying them and finding out how many of them were within 15 hours of graduation. That's one semester of coursework. And so we identified 100 cases where students were within 15 hours. What came out of that were a whole large number of students that were within 3 hours of graduation. And so you're thinking, all 3 hours of graduation, that's no big deal. They should graduate if they only have one semester to go. Well, what we found out is many of them were no longer at Marshall University. They had separated from the university and given up. So imagine that we have this student that's within 3 hours of graduation, and they decided to drop out of school because they don't feel like they can graduate. And so this was I guess you could say, a very interesting finding, something we didn't expect to find, but something we felt like we could definitely help with. And we were able to get 34 of those students that had separated from the institution that were not planning on graduating to graduate. And we're able to move, we almost broke 50% that year, starting in February. So we only had a very short, basically had the summer to make a correction. But during the summer, we were able to get that many students through graduation. And I can tell you, this was definitely a university-wide effort. The advisors took this, it was all one-on-one interaction. Everybody grabbed an individual and said, I'm going to find this individual, try to help them. So the first trick was try to get in contact with them. And I heard lots of stories about, people thought it was, they didn't believe this was happening. Lots of tears. We told these students we would pay for them to come back to school, and we'd pay for their course. They didn't have to pay anything. So pretty impressive stuff. If we had been in the state of Tennessee, every one of these students in the funding formula, we would have got an extra $6,000. So this is something, if you have a state funding formula, this is something that's very important to do. I would also tell you that at Marshall, we have some very generous alumni. And once the story got out of how we helped these 34 students, an alumni member came forward and donated $1 million to the institution to do more of this type of activity. Here's some of the examples of things that we found that were unusual. We had a psychology major that was lacking one foreign language, just a 3-hour foreign language was it. And they needed to graduate. We had identified a double major in biology and management that was lacking one lab course. A 1-hour course was keeping them from graduating. They had 190 semester hours, and they didn't have a degree from Marshall. It was a very unique, very odd situation. They were looking to get a second degree in management. Well, if you get management as a second major, it has a different set of requirements than if it's a first major. Well, she satisfied the requirements for management as a second major, but didn't satisfy management as a first major. And of course, she was lacking that 1 hour in lab to get the biology major. So that 1 hour in chemistry was keeping her from getting either one of those majors as an individual. We brought them or worked with the dean of the College of Business, Dean Mukherjee, and we found a way to help that student graduate. And we had an education major that was just lacking a communications course. So they'd actually finished everything they needed to do to graduate. They'd completed their education, teaching, all that type of stuff. All they needed was a communication course. And of course, what we said was, well, didn't that person get up in front of a whole bunch of students and teach a bunch of classes? I mean, it seems like they've kind of mastered that. So this is the type of stuff that came up, which again was, I think, I hope you probably find that as shocking as we did. The following year, we did this earlier. We said, okay, well, last year we started in February. Now we're going to get to start this in August. And we have an entire year to identify those students and find a way to help them graduate. Again, we found about the same number of students that we're looking at. Without some kind of special program, we probably would have had either a 46 or 47% 6-year graduation rate, but we were able to radically increase that last year to 51%. And again, this was during the year of COVID that we were able to pull this off. And it was the first time any university in the state of West Virginia broke a 50% graduation rate other than WVU. So it was a very impressive effort during a very difficult time. But again, if you have the right program in place, and if you have buy-in, and I cannot stress that enough, how all the deans, the associate deans, and all the professional advisors just took this on as a something that they consider to be very important. And I can tell you, this is going to have long-term benefits for Marshall University, because it's not just about getting those out the door. Those individuals felt like Marshall University went out of their way to help them. We paid for them to come back and take their classes through this donation from one of our alums. They now understand that Marshall University truly cares about them. I can guarantee you one day those individuals are going to be big donors to the university, and they're going to help out the next generation of students. All right, well, that's my presentation. I hope that people have some questions that they can ask, and I look forward to talking about those.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. This was really insightful, and all these practices and examples that you shared are so important for all institutions to think about. You know, in my progressive roles, from a faculty to a chair to a dean, you know, we have slowly gotten to understand better and better how to get our students to be successful. It's not just in the classroom, it's a lot of activities beyond the classroom. A lot of people get involved in these initiatives, and it's a team effort, and it's a campus culture. So clearly, these are great examples. We do have some questions. A few questions have been sent to me separately, and some are on the chat, but I'll read out some of those. The first question, which has actually, you have already answered, Dr. Taylor, was from Dr. John Black, and I will still read that question out. And the question was, much like the math pathways, was any thought given, or was there any potential need for other subjects like critical thinking, logical reasoning, or similar things? Dr. Black is here. Is there anything you would like to say on this?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dr. Black. I'll go ahead and let you comment if you want to further elaborate on that question, then I'll answer. Thanks.
Yeah, and sir, it's just John. That's up there, Kurzat. And just so you know, I actually did Austin Peay when I was in the military at the satellite installation and other stuff, and I was up at Campbell as well for many of my years. So
I ended up there for the same reason. My dad was in the Air Force, so I spent my whole life there.
Yeah, I could imagine. First of all, I applaud all the stuff you're doing and the aspect of retention and everything else, from sponsorship programs and everything else. So just building on that, the one thing is the student being able to think critically, to see beyond themselves, metacognitive and everything else. But the other thing that sort of stemmed from that is there is implied in all the stuff you're doing that you truly care about the student. It's not just caring in a, hey, we care about you. You're doing it. You're giving mentorship. You're going back and reaching out. The alumni see that you care. How is that idea of, do you see that in feedback, that caring about me, if I'm a student, matters to them and success?
Absolutely. And as since you're familiar with Austin Peay, caring can just go a long way all by itself. When we were at Austin Peay and had that dramatic increase in the fall to fall retention of 7%, we didn't have all these great analytic tools, and we didn't have all these programs in place. It literally was just faculty connecting with students that were struggling and letting them know they cared. And what we would then, faculty member would say, man, I found out they lost their scholarship. We got them down to financial aid, and they were able to renew their scholarship. Without renewing their scholarship, they would have had to drop out of school. And so there's a lot of that, as you could say, one-on-one interaction. And again, the student found out that they cared. One thing I didn't point out here that I'm a big proponent on is helping students think about what they're going to do when they leave the campus, when they graduate. For so many years, we've talked about, let's get them to degree. But I think what I always like to do is, with the professional advising, have the professional advisors help them get the right courses, get them through school, but then that allows the faculty members to have much higher level conversations with those students and talk to them about what they're going to do afterwards. Because I think once they figure out why school is important, which is, again, I think why the mathematical pathways are important, if they're taking statistics, they understand that relates to what they're going to do in the College of Business, and they apply more effort to it. But I also think if they understand what they're going to do when they leave college, they apply more effort. And sometimes all this is pretty simple conceptually. They put more effort into their course, they have a better chance of being successful.
Yeah, there's an old saying, never confuse simple with easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had some of the same work for some of the areas I consult in, that if you can show a student where they'll have impact, if you can show a learner where they'll have impact, especially a Generation Z, a millennial type of mindset, not to be stereotypical, but a lot of them say, I need purpose. And if you can't show them how today's learning applies in their later purpose, they'll disconnect. So I applaud you for all your efforts, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's always nice meeting somebody that went through the military. So you actually were in the military?
Yes, sir. 30 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, thank you for your service.
All good.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Black. There's a couple of other questions that are kind of back to back, which are somewhat related. So let me come to the next question, which says, how does career development, for example, major selection, play a role in student success at Marshall and other universities as well, with first-time freshmen, especially undecided first-year students?
Yeah, I don't have, what I'll say is I don't have hard data on that, but I do have some anecdotal data. When I was back early in my career, when I was a dean, I put together something I call Career Night. And so what we would do is invite in high school students from across the state and try to help get them identified with what type of things they could do. We've expanded upon that at Marshall University. We have a thing called the Green and White Day. And the centerpiece for that is the academic showcase. So this does two things. One, it helps recruit students, but more importantly, I think it helps them identify with what they can do with that degree. So the academic showcase, most students, they come in, they're like, oh, I know what a nurse does. I might want to be a nurse. I know what an engineer does. I might want to be an engineer. I know a teacher, it looks like a good career. Or a medical doctor. So I've named off 4 or 5 things. I'm like, Marshall has 100 degree options. What are those other 96 options out there? So if a student comes in and all they do is go over the nursing department or they go to the engineering department, they don't understand all the broad breadth of what they can do with their life. So the academic showcase is that first option to start looking at stuff. But it's also that area where they start meeting with faculty. Again, I think this is the important part, where faculty can start talking to them and say, okay, if you get a degree in this field, here's what you can do with that, and here's what you need to accomplish as you're going through school to make sure you can be successful in that career. And even though I don't have any hard data, I can tell you that as a physics professor, we sent students off to do summer REUs. That was a big thing that we pushed. And I think when I was chair of physics, we probably had more students going off to do summer research than any school in the nation. We would have anywhere from 15 to 16 students every summer going off to a major laboratory, getting paid to do research. And they were a changed person when they came back. As John said, their motivation was radically different. When they were in class, they were motivated. They knew what they want to do when they got finished. And to me, that's like the most important thing. You got to motivate them to want to learn, and then you can teach them. So I hope that was a good answer to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I have 2 questions that both relate to international students. And I'll sort of combine them. But the first question was, what is the best procedure? What kind of best practices exist to help international students to be successful? And the second part of the second question from another person is, the international students have dropped in number because of COVID, immigration policies, reduction in face-to-face classes. Do we have any specific strategies to increase international student population, given what we have lost in the last 2 years?
A very good question, and I'll preface this on the front end. This is absolutely not my area of expertise, but I'm trying to come up to speed in this area as quickly as possible. Let me start with first the recruitment piece, and I always think of recruitment as the first step in terms of student success, because it's how you go about that recruitment, I think, that helps bring that student into the institution. Let's look at it from what I've said about freshmen. You bring them in, and you've got to get them engaged as quickly as possible with the institution or something. To me, everybody's heard of grit. What is that grit? A skill that somebody has, and it's been shown that a student with a strong grit score will be much more successful than somebody with a strong ACT. And I do have good data on that. I was a physics professor, of course, and we had lots of students coming in with high ACTs. It wasn't uncommon for us to have a student with a perfect score on the ACT, or perfect scores of 36, 34 is very high. Anything over 30 is a pretty good, solid ACT score. We had numerous students come in with scores in the 30s that ended up washing out of our physics program. On the other hand, there were students that came in the low 20s, and you would say, man, that student just isn't going to pull off in physics. But because they had the determination or the mindset for it and just pushed through it and got connected to the institution, or got connected to the department, those were some of the most successful students I ever had. Not just being successful in graduating, but then when you look at their career and what they've accomplished after they graduated, they have had amazing careers. Some of them now are in their early 30s, and these are the type of things that I'll go to my grave with, looking at those students and seeing what they accomplished, coming from that low ACT score. So that type of thing is important. So how do we think about that with a international student? What we're doing, and actually it's the College of Business, Dean Mukherjee, that's helping build this model for our entire institution, is developing direct relationships with other universities. And so what he's done is he's developed some relationships where a student will complete 3 years over at their other institution and then come to Marshall University for their last undergraduate year. When they finish that, they'll get their bachelor's degree from either Marshall or their in the country where they came from, and then they'll get a master's degree at Marshall. What we're hoping that does is it connects the institution with Marshall while they're still at their home institution in the other country. And I think it's that connection, that building that relationship, as I say, it improves their grit score. If something bad happens in your life, or they come to America, something doesn't quite go right, or I can only imagine what it's like to go from one country to another, and the whole world is different. If they have a support structure there, that can help them through a crisis, and so I think that will help build on that. The other thing we're doing at Marshall is we've just put our English as a second language fully online. And what we're going to try to do is get students in that English as a second language while they're still at their home institution. And so we're going to be building on those relationships. In terms of being successful once they get to Marshall, again, this is something I don't have a strong background in, but what we're going to try to do is create that on-campus environment, that intercultural center, so that those students have a place they can call their own. Physically, they can call their own. It's their space. There'll be other students just like them that'll be struggling with the same type of issues they're struggling with. And we hope to create that environment where they can help each other. And that's about as far as I've got. Hopefully, my attitude is once you do those things, I want to collect data to see if it works.
Yeah, this is great because we do have a lot of international students, and just like one of those questions, we have lost some during these years, and it's I think the whole idea of campus culture and support that Dr. Taylor talked about, I think pretty much applies to international students anyway, but the question then becomes, how do we provide more customized support? And that's where the intercultural center and all of that comes in. So that's great. Couple of questions came in more directly. I will just mention those. One was the role of faculty. What is how can faculty who are not directly involved in student advising or student success in terms of their primary roles, what is the role of faculty in ensuring student success? What can faculty do?
Obviously, a very good question. One is just within your own particular courses, trying to help identify students that might be struggling. If you're in something like a College of Business, I had an associate dean back where I came from. And the reason why she became the associate dean was because of the work she did as a faculty member. She created some basically, like, she was in biology, so she created a biology organization, student organization. And then she said, let's get all the student organizations within the college together. And let's not make that just for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Let's get those students coming in the door into that organization as rapidly as possible, because again, we're losing those students in their freshman year, not in their sophomore year. If you can get them to their sophomore year, the odds of them being successful is very high. The trick is getting them through their freshman year. So she created we called it an academic rush week. So in the second week of school, we had all these student organizations out on the lawn, and we got all of our freshman science students and math and students to come through and try to get them connected with one of those student organizations. Now, what does that have to do with faculty? Well, she was a faculty member, and she really took that role as being a mentor to that student organization very seriously, and trying to help work with those incoming freshmen as a faculty member, and talking to them, and helping get them contacted with juniors and seniors, because you, as a faculty member, you can't help 200 or 300 students, but you can help create a structure where the juniors and seniors in your program are mentoring those freshman students. And it really is that connection, because those juniors and seniors went through whatever problems those freshmen are going through. And so if that freshman feels like they have somebody they can go to and talk to and say, I remember one student in particular, he was thinking about dropping out as a freshman. He had never experienced something as hard as the university physics course. And everybody kept telling him, said, look, I don't care how smart you are, it's hard for everybody. It's just a hard class. It turned out he ended up graduating as the #1 physics major when he was a senior. He went to Georgia Tech and got his Ph.D. in physics. And he's done great stuff in material science. But if without that mentorship, he would have dropped out of the university physics course. So just getting somebody there that's been through it and recognizing that everybody struggles. Once they realize that, I think it helps a lot.
Thank you. Let's open up to more questions. We have some more time. Any other question from the audience?
Good morning, President Austin and Provost Taylor. This has been a phenomenal presentation, and I just want to thank you for your work. So I actually watched the Tennessee Board of Regents work at Tennessee Tech when I was there for about 25 years, and I see a couple of my Tennessee Tech colleagues on this call, Dr. Timmerman and Dr. Tori Moraes. And it's just great to see what you did in Tennessee and now what you're doing at Marshall. That truly is related to why we all do what we do every day.
Yeah.
It really is about student success, regardless of our position. I mean, that's why we're here. And I just want to thank you for your work and tell you how thrilled I am to make the connection.
Well, thank you very much. You have no idea what it meant to be invited to this. This is not the type of thing I've typically done. I've just, as a physics guy, I tend to fly under the radar. So, yeah, but of course, Tennessee Tech is a phenomenal institution. I'm from Tennessee, so the reputation of Tennessee Tech when I was a kid, if you're smart, everybody wants to go to Tennessee Tech. And, but it's nice getting to get out and talk to faculty. And I think the most important part of this is, and I think everybody here gets it, student success is not about, early on in Tennessee, everybody was worried about standards would get lowered or whatever. But it was really interesting. I think people increased standards because they realized once they started helping students could achieve those new higher standards. It really is about helping them outside the classroom. And what I found, I really, at both institutions, at any place I go, people want to help, and across the campus, they want to help students. They want to be a part of it. As leaders, we just have to find a way to help plug them into the right location and create a structure to make it easy for them to help the students.
Exactly. And one last thing I'll mention, I'm also excited with your comments about grit, of grit with student success and success in life. And I see Dr. Black with a thumbs up.
Yeah.
I want to make some connections here because I now have the good fortune of working for President Bob Caslin at the University of South Carolina, who was the former superintendent at West Point.
Oh, wow.
To South Carolina to lead the University of South Carolina. And he will be joining us hopefully next year for the conference. And he just wrote a new book, and a lot of that work had been done with the author of Grit in their work at West Point. And grit proved to be one of the most important factors. And like you said, often far more predictive than ACT scores or SAT scores. Yeah. And so I don't know, I've gotten so excited about this session and the chance to connect all of you up and to think about the work we might do for next year's conference based on this presentation and all your excellent work. So thank you for what you're doing.
Well, and you can only imagine how important it is a place like West Point, because it's like a daily survival.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I look forward to talking with you further. And again, thank you for being here.
Oh, again, thanks for having me. This has been incredibly exciting. I really appreciate it. It really was a big honor for me, for Dean Mukherjee to ask me to do this. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Dr. Elkins is the president-elect of SAM, as we all probably know. She's going to be, in charge of the organization from the middle of this year, and will be in charge of next year's conference. So, hopefully we will come back in person in Orlando for our 2022 conference, and that's where she was talking about her president. She's a chancellor in a college in the university system, University of South Carolina system. I do have one more question, and that is coming from, it came in the private text, but it's a question about how do you collaborate with other colleges in the system, in the state system, to advance some of your initiatives, and how have two or more colleges collaborated on programmatic issues and so on? How does that work?
You know, I'll start with just the student success thing and then maybe talk about, and are they talking about from student success standpoint or academic programs?
Academic as well. I think it's broader than students.
I'll first start because you saw that we did this across the state of Tennessee with the co-requisite model and the math pathways. Let me just say that those were not easy. Before you had data that showed it worked, it all seemed super counterintuitive. And on my campus, we almost had a vote of no confidence in the president at that time and the administration because there was a strong push to do this and nobody wanted to do it. Everybody said it wasn't going to work. Anyway, and of course, then we went to the state level, the Tennessee Board of Regents, and it was kind of challenging at that point. There had to be a lot of pressure put on to make it happen. But once it happened and the data came out, everybody was like, wow, it's so counterintuitive, but it happened. So sometimes, you know, it's always better if you can get buy-in and help have those hard conversations at the beginning. I always say if somebody's opposed to doing what you want to do, maybe you shouldn't do it. And so if you can't convince them that it's the right thing to do, you know, you need to have those conversations. On the other hand, if the data backs it up and says this is the right thing to do, then you have to at least apply a little bit of pressure moving forward. Now, in terms of getting schools working together, what I always say is you've got to find win-win situations. Dean Mukherjee is looking at this right now in the state of West Virginia. There's only two big schools in the state of West Virginia. You got WVU and Marshall. And so we have almost all the graduate programs at those two institutions. And then we have a lot of other schools that need some of those graduate things. And so Dean Mukherjee has just recently worked out they put their master's degree in accountancy online. It's one of the few accounting programs that's fully online. And they're developing relationships with each institution so that we can mentor those students while they're at that school and they're doing their undergraduate degree in accounting. As they're a senior, they can start taking accounting courses at Marshall University, and then they can very easily transition into that master's program. And so those are those like win-win situations. It's a little more difficult if you're looking at relationships at the undergraduate level. In Tennessee, I think they've done a great job. You know, from Tennessee Tech, they're the engineering school. I think Tennessee benefited from having two governors over a 16-year period that even though one was Democrat and one was Republican, they both understood higher education at a deep level. And what they wanted to do was create niches at each institution. But what they wanted to have, every place had a purpose, as opposed to everybody trying to be all things to all individuals. And so they said, okay, Tennessee Tech, that's going to be the technical school. This other school is going to do this other thing. And I know at Austin Peay, we really focused in on working with those other schools. And our niche kind of became science and mathematics when I was the dean of science and math, where we didn't, you know, we really built up our computer science program. We ended up going from 17 graduates a year to nearly 100. And that was because we realized that was a big need in the state of Tennessee. So maybe what I would say is focusing on the need first. You got to focus on what's needed out there, see if it's happening. And especially at the state level, a lot of times one school can't do it by themselves. They're going to need help from another school. Another thing we're working on right now is we're developing a joint program with a local community college in aviation maintenance. And that community college doesn't have the resources to set that program up. So we're coming in at Marshall and we're committing $6 million to set the program up. But at the same time, we're not a community college, so we don't feel like we should be offering that degree ourselves. And so we're going to offer it as a joint degree. So there's always great ways to win-win situations. And I know a minute ago, simple is not always easy, but I think keeping things simple is the right thing to do. If people can keep their ego out of it and not worry about who gets credit, I know that's a super obvious saying, but it's absolutely true. You can accomplish tremendous things.
That's fantastic. We do have one more question. I think we are close to time. So this would be the last question. And this is coming from one of the attendees here. Did you offer test optional admission because of your understanding of the better correlation of grit to success?
Absolutely. Right now, especially due to COVID, there was a lot of challenges with getting ACT and SAT. And it turns out that, believe it or not, high school GPA is a pretty strong predictor of success, even if they have a poor ACT score. And this probably goes back to what we've been talking about, grit. Maybe they're not academically strong, but they're just persistent. And being persistent goes a long way to being successful. And so we have looked at GPAs, and also students, a state like West Virginia or Tennessee, they might go to a rural school and not have a strong academic background there because of just, the environment they were in. And so that GPA is a strong indicator. We've extended this even forward now with our School of Pharmacy, School of Medicine, and School of Physical Therapy. Our dean of the School of Medicine is now has made the MCAT optional because this tends to be a barrier for minority students. It's known that they don't do as well on standardized tests as non-minority students. And so we're working at other ways of identifying students that could be successful in those graduate programs. And we've been tracking it and looking at that data. And so, yeah, to me, there's a lot other better ways of looking and finding what's going to help a student be successful than standardized tests. And I'll speak from the standpoint, I was in visual, obviously I was in physics, I always had to be exceptionally good on standardized tests. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful at stuff. It really has to do with that determination piece and that just pushing forward.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of SAM, I want to thank you, Dr. Taylor, for this engaging and insightful presentation. It was a pleasure having you with us, and I hope you will remain connected with SAM for a long period of time. And
thank you all very much for having me. Again, a huge pleasure. I hope we get to see some of you again. And hopefully, hope you have a great year next year, Dr. Elkins. Pleasure meeting you. Y'all take care.
Thank you. Thank you. And to all attendees, please keep your discussions going on WOBA through the social media platform, and the video recording will be available too. Take care.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.